Hello everyone, this is Lucas again, and in this video I'm going to show you how to create ability, or how to make ability for our users to connect and follow one another. This is probably one of the most difficult parts of this series, and it requires a little bit of focus. We're going to do everything test driven, and I'm going to be explaining as we go. So here's where we left off. We have the user that can log in, log out, and posts messages on like a common homepage. Everybody can see them, and only him can edit, delete, and everybody can create their own posts. So what we want to do now is under every post. Okay, let's just create this post. Under every post, for the users that, well, first of all, are not ourselves, we have a link to follow that user. And after we create that relationship, we can also unfollow that user by clicking a link. So what we need now is the place in the database where we can store all those relationships. And what we're going to do is quite interesting. It's quite different from what we did before when we talk about has many relationship. This time we will create a joint table. We call it a joint table because two different models can own that record. We call it relationship. But because both owners of that relationship table or relationship model will have the same name, which is user, so you belongs to user and belongs to other user, so we will have to differentiate between those two different users. And what we will do is we will start by creating this model. And well, the big difference when we create it is because we're gonna create it with different keys. So we're not gonna use user ID like we did before for post, but this time we'll use something else. So let's go ahead and create model, Rails generate model relationship. And here we will have two keys. One is going to be follower ID. And that's going to be type of integer. And the other one's going to be following ID, and that's going to be integer as well. Let's generate that model. Awesome. So we just generated a model, and let's start by creating some tests for that model. If we go here, we have this relationship spec. Okay, so for every relationship, we'll need two users. So let's use Factory Girl to generate them. Let's call them following user and followed user. Use Factory Girl. And the other one. Awesome. So before we will set our relationship, and we will use following user to create that relationship. So relationships create followed ID, and we will set it to followed user ID. Just like that. And here we can now set the subject. Okay, and we can write some basic tests for that. So first of all, it should be valid. Okay. we say it's followed user should equal followed user. So here we say this is the command we run on our relationship, and here this is name of variable. Okay, so they're actually, they have, the name says the same, but they're actually two different things. But we make sure that they should be equal because we use one to create other. So, oh, sorry, not it, it's here, it's here. It's following user should equal following user. Okay, and let's write some, validations. Describe when follower ID is not present. Do whoa. No. It. And in a similar fashion, whoa, we just do it for following. Is that the right one we generated? I can never remember. So I'll look at my, so following and follower IDs. Okay, great. Okay, and I think that's enough for now. We can save that. Go back here, and first of all, we need to run our migration. So rake db migrate. Yeah, rake db test prepare, and we can run the spec. Okay, so all the tests we just written are failing because there is no relationship between the relationship model and the user model. We're going to fix that now, but before we do that, let's go to our user spec for the models user, and it's empty right now. So, but this time we're going to put something in it because we need to, make sure everything is connected before we start working with our controllers. So say before user.new, and we give him an email, and the email will be, say, joe@.com. Oh, sorry, yeah, that's right. And then password. And password confirmation. Excellent. We can now set the subject to user. And we can type some tests. Okay. Actually, let me just make it bigger so make sure you can see everything. It should respond to, and here we're gonna write some commands, like we wanna call that on the user model and return something. So I would say should respond to followers. Okay, we want to say user.followers, and that should return as all the followers of the user. It also should say well, I would say users followed, since like followers would be the users that are following the user, and users followed would be the users that this user is following. Okay, so that's the logic. But for now, we just want this to work, just the test pass, and later on we'll make sure that it's passing, that then some other validations are also in place. So, okay, so all these tests are failing now. Let's fix that. Let's go to our app models and open the relationship model and also the user model. So let's start with the relationship model. Let's say that the relationship belongs to followed user, right? This is what we specified here. It's followed user and following user. So say following user and followed user. Okay, and there is something here that we need to do right here, because the name of everything here is different. We don't call our user just user, we call it following user or followed user. We have to be more specific for our applications so it doesn't really get lost when it's trying to find for the right model. So we need to specify what class is the following user. So class name, and we would say what's a user class, okay? And also we need to say what is, how we find that, because there are two user class objects in here, and one it has different ID and the other one probably be a different. So when we created our relationship, we specified that we have follower ID and the following ID, and we can use that right here. So say foreign key would be, in this case, because it's a following user, so it's a following, so we say it following ID, just like that. Okay, and for the followed user, it's going to be exactly the same except for the different key. So class name, it's also user, capital U, foreign key, it's gonna be followed ID. Oh, of course, also colon here, don't forget that. Okay, we can save that and run the spec again, and we have now 7 failing, and that should take it. All right, so there's still, oh yes, because we need to go back to our user and say, because we use the user to create this test object. So we say here has many relationships. Okay, and right here, let me just look at my notes. We also have to specify the foreign key. It's going to be follower ID, because the user that's creating a relationship, we use his key as a follower ID to create a relationship. If we save that, some of the tests should start passing. Whoa, they're not passing yet. Followed ID, unknown attribute follow ID. Is that a typo that we made? So let's have a look. Oh, so following ID and follower ID. Okay, so we should use following ID and follower ID. That's what we created. So okay, so here we say, oh, we messed it up. Follower ID. Okay, and following ID. Oh. Okay, so followed user has a following ID and following user has follower ID. Okay, and in our relationship, sorry, in our user, we say we use follower ID. Okay, and that should work. It does not. Followed the and we just didn't do it properly in our test. So following ID right here. Okay, in our spec. Yeah, and this indeed made some of our tests pass. So there's 2 failing tests here because we have no validations on our relationship, and we expect them to yeah, if you hear the big noise in the background, that's Chinese celebrating some wedding, I suppose. It's a lot of that, fireworks. Okay, so we can close that. And here we have to write those validations. So validates, and we did that many times. Follower ID presence true, and validates following ID also presence true. Okay, and when we run this spec, oh Jesus, I messed it up. Follower ID and following ID. Follower ID and following ID. Yes, that should work. Okay, relationship. We make a typo. It sounds like we made a typo right here. Okay, let's fix this real quick and run the spec again. Yes, indeed, that was the problem. So now a user should respond to those different objects. So let's go to our user, and first of all, how we find all those users that we follow. So let's say has many users followed, and here we say he has those through relationships, and we say source followed user. So here in our relationship, we say belongs to followed user. So that's the user that we're looking for. So all the followed users by this user will be in our relationship defined as the followed users. So if we save that, that should also make one of our tests pass. Okay, and we just left with only one test left. So let's fix that too. So here we'd say has many, and now we cannot say relationships again because we already used that. We need to change it, and I like to use inverse relationships. Foreign key would be following ID. Probably better would be followed ID or something. Oh, the colon is on the other side. And also we need to, because we don't have a class that says inverse relationship, so we also need to specify the class. Class name. Relationship. Okay, and here we also want to do exactly the same thing as we did before with our users followed. So has many followers this time. Okay, and we has those through inverse relationship. Okay, and the source is following user, and of course colon right here, and that should make the other test pass 2. Yay, they're all passing. Okay, so we have the user and the relationship connected. We have a lot of functionality there right now. So we can start actually using that in our user interface. So in order to use our user interface, we can generate the new test, the integration test. And we call it following users. Okay, what's wrong? Okay, and of course it put it in the wrong place, into request folder, so I'll move it right away into features. Okay, it's now in features. Let's open it up and clean this stuff right here. Okay, so here we're gonna write quite a few tests actually. Let me just open my cheat sheet because I prepared this before. First of all, we need to start just like before by setting up our tests, because we're going to log in user and log him out. So we need to include warden. Let's double colon here. Test helpers. Test mode. Okay, in here, let's define our subject first, which is going to be, of course, a page. So whenever we say it, we mean page. And for all those tests, we're going to use 2 users. So let's create them. So it's called following user. And that's going to be created by Factory Girl. And let's create followed user. And same, use the Factory Girl. Okay. We also, because we're gonna following users by clicking the link under the post, we need to create that post so we can also interact with it. So and we use the bang here to create it immediately. Post. And use the Factory Girl again. Create the post, but this we also need to override the user ID. So we make sure we know who exactly created that post, and that would be the followed user. The ID, just like that. Okay, so we can now write some tests. So first of all, I like to start with the case scenario where I don't want people to do anything. Describe as not in user do, and we say before visit root path, it should not have button that says follow. Okay, so let's also do describe as logged in user do, and here we say describe for own posts. Okay, we put some logic here in a minute, and for other users. Do. Okay, the reason why I did two different sets of tests is because I want the user to don't see the link for their own post and only see it for other people's posts. Okay, so let's start with the others. Okay, so we're gonna have some more logic here. So before do, we need to log in as a user, logging as following user. Okay, and we visit root path, because on the root path this is where all our posts are displayed. And after we visit the root path, we should have the button, so it should have a button that says can I follow, yeah. And also we expect not like, okay, so I think this is we can skip couple steps. We can say it should not have but have link, and the link would say unfollow. Okay, and also we want to be actually, now that's, I think this is good enough here. We expect that when we click that button, it should create connection. Do. So we expect click button follow to change relationship count by 1. Okay, and I think that's enough for now. So let's run the spec again. Okay, so okay, there is a typo here with factor girl. Run the spec. Okay, so there is no link, there is no button follow. So we shall let's go and create it on the home page. Okay, so let's go into our view files, into our static pages home. Okay, so under here, under all the links for the user to edit his own posts, we'd like to put a simple form that we can create the posts with. So first of all, let's start by saying form for, let's say, relationship. Okay, And what we need to, because here we need to pass a certain URL, because it's kind of anonymous, anonymous form. We don't create this variable here. We just use the class name to create new relationship. So we need to pass some URL. Okay, and the URL we just don't know yet. So the URL would be something. Okay, we say do F for form. Okay, and we get that URL here. We need to create the routes for create and also delete action. So in our config folder, in the routes, we can add here relationships. And because we only need 2 actions, we say only create. And we're also going to be destroying them, so destroy. You can save that, go back to our form on our home page. Okay, and here we can break routes to see what the route will be. And we have those here in the bottom, relationships. That's the create action. So you can say relationships path. Okay, and let's put some content in here. First, we need a submit button that says follow. So F submit follow, and that's it. If we go to our home page now, okay, and we refresh, so this is different user. So I created off screen. I created different user that now can be followed. Okay, this is my own post that I just created a second ago, and I can see this button follow. It goes to the right place, but of course we don't have a controller, we don't have anything yet, so we get this error. But if we run our spec, in the spec we still don't click that button. Okay, oh sorry, we do click that button. We do it right here, click button, follow. So it wants to go to our controller. So that's why it gives us uninitialized constant relationships controller error. Let's go ahead and create that controller. And the controller will be relationships. And press enter. Okay, create a whole bunch of files. So let's now go and in the helpers, spec helpers, there is this annoying pending note, and we're not going to put any tests here just yet, so we can close that. And go to our newly created app controllers relationship controller, and we can add here define create action, and also let's do it already here, define destroy action. And for the create action, we're going to put some logic in a second, but let's run our spec again and make sure we're getting the right errors. Yeah, so the first one is that we didn't find the button, but the other one, when we actually click it, is that there is a template missing. So here we can very simply just go ahead and create that functionality right away. So let's say at with relationship equals current user relationships create, and here we have to pass something to that relationship. We need to pass the following ID. Okay, and here we need to pass something, but in our form we don't pass anything yet. So if we go back to our form on the home page, we need another field. Okay, we need a field where we pass the ID of the current user that we want to follow. So we'd say F, and instead of using just a normal input, we use the hidden field. Okay, and that's gonna be for following ID, and the value of that field will be the owner of the post, so p.user.id, just like that. So now this will be submitted. The user won't see it, but it will be part of the form. If we save that and go to relationships control, we can now say this params relationship. Okay, and we say following ID. Okay, we do it this way because it's a params is array, and this is how we take things out of the array, or the hash really. But it's a hash, yeah. So instead of doing this define and allowing certain arguments, because we're not doing the mass assignment, we specify each item exclusively, so we can do it this way. Okay, so we can save that, but also we need to redirect after we create our relationship. We just redirect to root path. Okay, and now if we run the spec, okay, the first test is passing, so we actually create that relationship. The test that's not passing is then the one that is expecting this link not to appear, therefore not logged in users. And let's fix that. It's actually quite easy. If we go to the home page, we have this form, and let's restrict it only to the logged in users. So I say if current user, okay, and just end here. So unless we have the current user, we don't display it. And if we run the RSpec, it of course now passes. So if we go back to our following user spec, we have this pending test for own tests, for own posts. So let's fill that out and make sure that we don't display follow button for ourselves. So before we're gonna log in as followed user. So that's the one who creates the post. Followed user, and then we visit root path. Okay, and here would say it should not have this follow link. It should not have link or button follow. Okay, and of course that will fail now because we can see this button. Okay, and let's restrict that also on our homepage. If current user, and we can say end, but we can also say like this, say p.user is not equal, and this is how you say equal current user. Yeah, just like that. And if you run the spec again, hooray, everything is passing. So let's go ahead and say what's going to happen after we actually create our post. So, so here, let's open another describe blog. So after following, say, do, and let's say before we click that link, because we only do it inside of this it block, so it's not available here. So we have to click it again. So click button, follow. And there is, well, let's say it should not have button follow anymore. So when we click it, we expect this button not to be there anymore. We also expect that when we click that button, it changes to a link to unfollow. So it should have link unfollow. And when we click that link, it should destroy unfollow user. So do and expect click link unfollow to change relationship count by -1. Okay, so we can save that and run the spec again to make sure everything is failing in the right way. Okay, so there is no link unfollow. We could not find follow link after we delete it. Oh, sorry, not find the follow if. Okay, okay, so after we click it, we expected not to find follow link, but it was still there, and there was no link unfollow. So let's fix them all at the same time. So first of all, we need this link unfollow under our relationship form. So if we go here, we say if the user and the user is correct. So inside of here, we'll have this if-else scenario where user is either following the other user or not. So let's create like a variable inside of this part of our website, and let's call it relationship. So let's say if they have the relationship, and say it's the current user. There are more elegant ways than this, but this is quite easy. Relationships where relationships where following ID is our user, so p.user.id, and we just take the first, because this will return us like a list, and even if it's only one element, the list will have to be like we need to extract something from that list. Okay, so even if it's only one element, we need to call first on it. Okay, so here we can have this nice if-else scenario. So if there is a relationship, or there isn't a relationship really, blank. Okay, if there is no relationship, we would render this form, and else we would make the link to unfollow. And that would go to, well, first of all, we will take our relationship here and okay, and we will pass it to delete method. So that will go to our destroy path. Okay, awesome. Or destroy, but there is no destroy path, but yeah, it will go to our destroy action in the controller. And if we run the spec now, it will complain about lack of template, I suppose. Yes, it's a lack of template. So let's include the logic in our controller. So in our relationships controller, destroy action, let's find this relationship. And that's going to be find by params ID, because our link contains the whole object, so we can extract ID from it. And we call destroy on it. Destroy, and then we would redirect back to the root path. All right, let's run the spec again. Everything is passing nicely. So I think it's a good time to actually have a look at our user interface, because I mean, you can look any minute, but let's reload. And I can now follow this user here. And if I follow, it becomes my followed user. And we have this relationship that you can use for something else. And it turns into this link unfollow. If I click that, I destroy that relationship, and the unfollow link turns into a follow button. Simple as that. So the other thing I want to do with you is to put the number of users that you're following or are following you. So let's write the test for that, and let's call it counting connections, perhaps. Okay, so here let's say describe. And here we have two connections for following users and for followed users. So let's say describe for following users do, and right here for followed users do. So let's start with this one right here. Before, we would click this button to follow, and the page should have a content that says, well, now you're following one user. So it should say, have content, and the content should be following, just following one. Okay. And here we're gonna have a little bit more complex action. So before do, and we also click the button follow, because we are logged in as user right here. So we can still click that button follow. And after we click it, we will log this user out. Log out. And we're using followed user, so we log this user out. And we use this colon here, okay? So login, log out actually have slightly different syntax. And then we log in as oh, sorry, not the following user. We log out following user. Following user. Okay, and then we log in followed user. I looked at the wrong test. It's actually this test that we are inside of. Okay, and after we do that, we visit root path. And here we should have a different content. It should say that we are followed by one user. So it should have content followed by one. Okay, because this user is now, the following user is now following us. As a followed user, we have one follower. So let's save that and run the spec, of course. Let me see if it's failing. and of course it's failing nicely. And we can go to our home page and include that here. So we have to be current user to see all of those, because otherwise it will cause us an error. So let's say let's put in the separate div just like that. And first, let's have first paragraph that says followed by, and here would say use some Ruby code, current user, and let me just take a look. We say users followed and followers. So let's say followed by, we have the followers. So let's count those users. Current user, followers, count. Okay, and similar to that, we have following, current users, and again I have to have a look. We define it as users followed. So go here, users followed, count. And if you run the spec, it's giving us a really bad error, and let's debug that. Okay, I found the problem, and the problem is very silly. I made a typo right here. I say follow wind ID, which is of course incorrect. It should be following ID, and it's quite a nasty little bug. But you know, those things happen all the time, so it's important that you know how to actually fix them. So we have now all 36 tests pass, 34 tests passing, and we can reload here. We can now say that we can now see that we are followed by 0 users, and we're following 0. But the minute we start following this first user, we are now following 1. And if we log out, and well, here first of all, there is less information for not logged in users. Login is info. Okay. And now we are followed by 1, and we following 0. So we can actually go here and follow this user, and now we both followed by 1 and following 1 user. Thank you very much for this video, and I'll see you soon in the next video. Thank you very much. Bye.